I am usually on the other side of these webinars, attending them and listening to all the great work that a lot of our colleagues share. So it's wonderful to be one of the speakers for our webinar. And hopefully you all find this information useful. I'm really excited to talk to you all about firm security and national resilience, particularly a public opinion survey that we recently conducted and some of the insights from that survey, and then how they can be applied specifically to extension work, but I think that it can be applied to a lot of the other state and federal organizations that a lot of our attendees often work with. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. First, I want to kind of give you an overview of what you can look forward into today's presentation. And so the first thing we're going to do is talk about some new policies related to biosecurity and farm security on the federal level, and then what that means as far as implications for extension and organizations working in and around farm and biosecurity. Then, of course, we're going to discuss some of the key findings from that survey that we mentioned, that survey specifically looking at Southeastern U.S. residents, and then the implications of those survey findings for extension, outreach, and policy. And then finally, we're going to talk about future extension-focused initiatives and collaboration opportunities that you all can engage with immediately. So why does this matter? It's really important to think about how closely agriculture is linked to our national security and our national resiliency, particularly in the elements of food systems, economic stability, and public health, and how our agricultural industry and security and resiliency are so interconnected. And then whenever there are risks, particularly in the agricultural industry, how that can affect our health, our economy, our energy supplies. And so some of those increasing risks that we have to think about are disease outbreaks, cyber threats, and climate impacts such as extreme weather disasters. And so here in Florida and nationwide, we've seen some of those risks. Of course, COVID-19 really underscored risks and how public health risks can impact agriculture. But even as recent as the avian flu outbreak or major hurricanes that regularly occur, particularly here in Florida and in the Southeast. But then it's also important for us to think about how public perceptions shape public policy, particularly those related to national security and in turn biosecurity. So the success of these policies largely depend on the public perception and the public support, which was why it was really important for us to do a study like what we're going to talk about today to explore what the perceptions and the support could be for policies related to biosecurity. So in the past 2 years or so, a lot of federal policies have been put in place to address farm or biosecurity. And so this is just one example of those federal policies that have been put into place, the USDA National Farm Security Action Plan. And these are the 7 main tenets of that plan. But again, this is just one example of some of those policies that have been put in place related to biosecurity and farm security. And the components of this plan then served as the foundation for the survey that we're going to talk about in the next few slides. But just to kind of quickly go over the 7 main tenets of this plan. And again, we can share a link to this plan in the chat. You can learn more about it. It's a pretty extensive document, but the 7 main tenets are to secure and protect American farmland, enhance agricultural supply chain resiliency, U.S. nutrition safety net that must be protected from fraud, abuse, and foreign adversaries, enhance research security, evaluate USDA programs to ensure America First policies, safeguard plant and animal health, and protect critical infrastructure. And it's really important that we as extensionists or government agency workers are just aware of policies that are enacted, because we know that even, of course, the policies that happen at the federal level, they trickle down all the way to the local level and impact the work that we do in good ways and sometimes maybe in negative ways. And so it's just good for us to be aware of those things. And so again, now we're going to kind of, that kind of sets the stage of a lot of the foundation of this survey that we're going to talk about. So the data that we're going to talk about, it was collected through an online survey in August of 2025. So the end of last summer. The survey included adults aged 18 and older, And this was done in partnership with the Pi Center and the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. In total, we had just over 1,000 respondents, and those respondents were in what the census categorizes as the Southeast. So Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. And the sample in each of those states were representative of the state populations based on race, gender, and other demographics according to the 2020 US Census. And so now we're going to dive a little bit more into the actual results of the survey and how people think about farm security and national resiliency. And so this survey was pretty extensive. So we're not going to talk about every question that was asked on the survey or every data point in the survey. So if you have additional questions or want to explore some of these topics a little bit more, please feel free to reach out to me. We're going to share my contact information at the end of the presentation, or feel free to drop it in the chat. But I'm going to share kind of some of the top line data and then what this means again for extension or federal employees or state employees working in government agencies and how you can apply some of these perceptions. So one of the first things that we asked about in the survey was people's perceptions of what they labeled as components of national security. And so we asked them about components of national security before providing them a definition of national security. And then we provided to them a definition of national security based on how the US government defines national security. And so you'll see here the blue represents people's responses before that definition was provided, and then the orange represents their perceptions of the components of national security after reading the definition that was provided. And so you can see here that before and after the definition, the three main components that people believe were components of national security or military strength, cybersecurity, and energy independence. And then some of the other components that people indicated being a part of national security included border security, food supply and agriculture, public health, and disease prevention. But those actually declined after people were able to read the definition of national security. And it's also important to note that respondents were able to select all that apply in this question. Then respondents were asked about whether they agree or disagree with the statement that farm security is national security. And over half, so 56% of people somewhat or strongly agreed that farm security is national security. And so this is a good indicator that at least over half of the respondents see that close linkage between overall security and farm security. So then respondents were asked about key components of farm security specifically. And again, this question was asked the same way that we asked about national security, where we asked about their key components, then provided a definition of farm security, and we used the USDA's definition of farm security, and then asked the same question after they had the opportunity to read that definition. And so some of the top respondents about key components of farm security were agroterrorism, water shortages, foreign ownership of land, animal-borne diseases, cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, and extreme weather. And those top responses did not change much before and after respondents had the opportunity to read the definitions of farm security. Fewer responses of people believing that these were components of farm security included artificial intelligence misuse, labor shortages, and over-reliance on artificial intelligence. And so it's important to note here that traditional risks still outweigh emerging technology concerns. And I think it's important for us to think about why this might be. And so maybe a large majority of people still don't understand some of these newer technology risks and how artificial intelligence can be misused, or what labor shortages could mean for farm security. Or don't appreciate the value of these things when it comes to security. So this is important to think about, more so of what people don't include as components of farm security. And then we asked several questions related to disease risks and specifically animal-borne diseases. Um, and so it's important to note here that over half of respondents are moderately or very concerned about diseases spreading from livestock or wildlife to humans. So those would be considered zoonotic or animal-borne diseases, thinking about Lyme disease, Zika, or even avian flu. And then 83% of respondents believe that federal regulation should be in place to reduce the risk of disease transmission from animals to humans. So a large majority of responses um, feel that some sort of regulations could be in place to reduce that transmission. And so here it's really important to think about, yeah, strong support for proactive policy and education is in place, but needing to ensure that these policies and regulations really support the success of the industry while also protecting the health and safety of people. And this can be a really delicate balance. So then we ask about trust in institutions, specifically about the trust of entities in order to protect farm security. And here you can see people trust farmers and producers way more than some of the other entities that were asked about in this question. And across a variety of studies, so of topics beyond just biosecurity, this is something that we see in the literature over and over again, that people, in agricultural topics at least, people always have a high trust in farmers and producers. And so it was interesting to see that that applied to this topic as well. It's important to give producers autonomy while also making sure that farmers and producers are educated on how they can ensure farm security on their operation. And I think that we can do this by involving farmers and producers in policy development, and a lot of our industry organizations do a really great job of that. Beyond farmers and producers, and obviously the military, more local institutions are trusted more. So thinking about state governments, nonprofit organizations, even though it's only about a third of the people trust those entities and organizations whenever it comes to protecting farm security. Then thinking specifically about food supply concerns, half of respondents are moderately or extremely concerned with disruptions to the U.S. food supply in the next 5 years, so in the recent upcoming future. And so, of the respondents that did indicate some level of concern to the disruption of the U.S. food supply, we asked what were factors of that concern. And so, the number one factor of concern was pests and diseases, and then followed by tariffs, extreme weather, labor shortages, water shortages, and cybersecurity. We also asked respondents about investments or protections that they were willing to support. And these were the top responses to the things that people were willing to support, with the number one types of investment or protection being rural infrastructure, followed by programs to attract labor to agriculture, emergency stockpiles of food and seeds, restrictions on foreign ownership of land, and grants or subsidies for cybersecurity. Then we asked about what people would be interested in learning about whenever it comes to these topics, and 61% of respondents indicated that they want to learn more about food systems and national security. And so this is really something to consider when planning programs or whenever you're having conversations with clients, that a majority of people do want to learn more about this. And so how can you interweave some of these topics in programs that maybe you're already doing or clients that you're already meeting with? Which leads into some of our key takeaways from this data. Some of the important things that I believe stood out from these results was that farm security is not well understood. And I don't think that that was a huge surprise. We don't really hear about farm security as a topic as much as we hear about national security. But I think that it's really important to then how that translates into the components of that people do need to know about, especially when it comes to making important decisions related to policy. Disease and food system risks resonate strongly with respondents in this survey. And so, how can you use that in messaging whenever you are talking about farm security, really leaning in on topics related to disease and food systems? And I think that that's because that really impacts people on a day-to-day, their everyday life. We're thinking about we don't want to get sick and we have to eat a nutritious food supply. And so things that are important to people on a day-to-day basis are going to be good messaging points to rely on when we are talking about farm security. Obviously, again, trust is the highest amongst farmers as people to, again, take ownership of this problem or to even talk about this problem instead of institutions, instead of government agencies. Messaging significantly shapes perception. And again, that's something that the literature tells us. And the results in this survey kind of underscore this, particularly when we're thinking about biosecurity and farm security. Public does support investments and regulations related to biosecurity. And so we need to think about how that can be a strength for us and again, working with farmers and producers in order to put positive and effective policies in place for the agricultural industry. Some implications for extension. So again, how can you take some of the results that we learned in this survey and apply them to your current extension programs or your future plans for your extension programs? One thing would be to translate farm security into relatable terms. Again, farm security doesn't really resonate with most of the population. And so how can you break that down so that it is relatable? Some suggestions there is to talk specifically about disease threats or extreme weather or whatever the threat related to biosecurity that aligns with your program. And so instead of using blanket terms like farm security, specifically call out the security topic. And again, usually that's going to be related to diseases or the food supply because that's what people are interested in. Really leverage those trusted voices. So whether that's farmers or local networks, and some examples of how you can do this is sharing specific examples. Maybe if you're doing a program where you're talking about biosecurity or farm security threats, actually bring in a farmer that maybe has a great case study of how he or she dealt with a threat on their farm. Maybe they had a disease outbreak and they can share an example of here are some of the biosecurity protocols that we put in place on our farm to protect our employees or our livestock. Being able to really share those stories is going to be helpful, but then also sharing those voices of farmers is going to resonate with your clients as well. So again, thinking about what you can focus on and how you can include topics of biosecurity in your programs, really leaning into food systems, public health connections, and risk preparedness. Those are things that people feel like they can take ownership of, they can actually act on, they can prepare for things and have involvement in instead of things that maybe feel more disconnected in their life. Based on the results in this survey, people are more interested in these topics as well. When we're thinking about any risk or crisis topic, it's always really important to address misinformation and awareness gaps early and often. And so this is particularly true when there's an imminent threat or maybe there is a security risk that exists, like a disease outbreak, making sure that you're sharing correct information, you're sharing from reputable, trusted sources, and if there is any gaps in knowledge that you're addressing that quickly so that misinformation doesn't fill those gaps. And so now we're going to talk about some efforts that are currently going on that you can engage with or some plans for future programs that we hope that you will engage with and provide some input on. So first, when we're thinking about strengthening extension capacity to address farm security risks, we're currently working on a survey that is much like the survey results that we just shared with you all that would be specifically for Florida extension professionals. And so the aim of that survey is to really better understand Extension's perception of biosecurity, their perceptions of animal-borne diseases, and then the training needs for client education. We hope that this survey will help identify gaps in communication tools as well as program delivery specifically related to biosecurity and animal-borne disease topics. And so this whole idea really came out of a coordination group that the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety and the Pye Center have been working with the folks in the Emerging Pathogens Institute for really over the last 18 months in order to address H5N1 or avian flu. There was a coordination group that was established that brought together researchers and extension agents and government professionals in order to address the outbreak and getting information out there correctly, but then also preparing folks for future outbreaks. And so our idea is to really expand this effort in order to address emerging threats instead of existing or ongoing threats. And so this working group is attempting to establish some biosecurity best practices, working through rapid response strategies, as well as really focusing on cross-sector collaboration. And again, we hope that the survey that we're doing with extension professionals can really provide some insight on how this coordination group can best support Florida agriculture in the Southeast, as well as extension professionals. And again, we're also being able to apply what we've already learned from the public into where extension professionals can best support their clients. Again, we really hope that the outcome of this coordination effort is more coordinated, proactive approach to agricultural resiliency. And so these coordination group meetings have already been happening for, again, the past 18 months, really focused on avian flu. But right now we're in the process of really expanding this group to focus beyond just avian flu. So what can you do now? I first want to ask you to engage with that upcoming extension survey. It should be released in the next week or two, and we really hope that we can get some good responses from our Florida extension community as we share that survey. Please share that with your colleagues and ask them to answer this too, so that we can again put together some tools and resources that would be most helpful for extension when addressing a variety of biosecurity and farm security topics. We also ask that if you feel like this coordination group work is relevant to you or your colleagues, please connect with me and we'd love to get you connected with that coordination group. Or feel free to refer a colleague that maybe their work more closely aligns with what we're doing in that coordination group. And then another thing that you can do is integrate farm security topics and resources into your already existing programs. And so thinking about some of the takeaways that we talked about in this presentation, how you can integrate that into your programs or in your conversations with clients. But then again, hopefully we'll have some new tools and new resources in the near future that you can integrate, whether that's handouts, or PowerPoint slides that you can integrate into your existing programs. We already have a really great catalog of biosecurity and farm security related IFAS documents that have come out of our work on avian flu. We'd be happy to share those in follow-up communication from this webinar, but being able to apply some of the topics and tips that are in those IFAS documents is another really great way to be able to integrate these topics now. And then we also ask that you strengthen those partnerships with your producers and stakeholders, particularly in the topic idea of biosecurity. Whenever there is a disease outbreak or there is a threat to biosecurity already existing, it's already too late to establish those partnerships or those relationships. And so think about the relationships and partnerships that your office or your colleagues might need during a disease outbreak or a biosecurity threat. And working on establishing those partnerships and those relationships now is a great idea, so that you can really lean on those relationships when there is an outbreak or a risk threat. And so with that, thank you all for joining me today. I'm happy to answer any questions that we might have in the chat, or I'm also happy to follow up with folks via email if you have questions about anything that was presented today, or if you want to dive a little bit deeper into any of those broad survey topics. I'm happy to provide more information there as well.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Ashley. Like she said, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A now as we're entering the Q&A portion. I don't see any yet, so I'll give a minute or two in case anyone's typing. Otherwise, thank you so much for your presentation, Ashley.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.